in the sense of his relationship with Elvira, for instance, his wife, it would sort of tip us off that he chose someone that was so, that he had such difficulty with, to think of that he was projecting some of what was inside of him onto another person, or choosing the other person to be like he was a match for what he needed to be unhappy with. So instead of wrestling inside with things that he, frustrations and things that were sort of his own good and bad, he tried to make the bad outside, and probably discovered Elvira and groomed her to become a match for what he was looking for. Someone who was very possessive, someone who was very jealous, someone to the extent that she became really quite paranoid and pretty crazy when it came to the situation with Doria, Doria the maid. So I think, and this kind of relationship is a sadomasochistic kind of relationship. There's a doer and a done to in the relationship, and they often flip, so that sometimes someone who's pretty sadistic can also be pretty masochistic. They trade places. So I think we'll see some of this too in the opera. That's why I bring it up. So
well, one of the things I want to talk about, given this background, or you.
Well, there was one other thing that I could mention.
Sure.
Right here, and this is the interesting thing Puccini chose the theme of what he was going to do the opera about. I mean, he chose a play of Gozzi. Is that how you pronounce it? Gozzi. And Gozzi's version was that of Turandot, and who Turandot was that the personality was more of a true dichotomy of good and bad. Therefore, the transformation from the demon to the ideal lover that Turandot supposedly makes was more believable. And Turandot was motivated by distrust of men and her wish to remain free. Therefore, there was the possibility of change that could exist from within her, from her own resources. She was maybe on the verge of being able to be transformed by the power of love. So Puccini read this version, and he needed to change it to be able to make it of interest to him. And how he changed it was that Turandot was motivated by revenge on behalf of Luo Ling, the ancestor, who now lives within her. So Turandot is talking about that one of the inner people in her life was Lu Ling, and she was going to avenge her. And that the way that this Turandot was going to transform needed to come from outside of herself. And I saw Turandot done by the Metropolitan Opera a year ago, and it was much more like the Gozzi version. So it was quite believable that this could happen, or more believable. In the version that we saw, it was this last week, seemed to me to be a little more Liu's sacrifice that was the thing that influenced Turandot to want to take a risk. So she became the catalyst for change. So that's all.
Well, and it's interesting that you should say that, because Turandot presents a very difficult dramaturgical problem. I mean, the drama itself is set up to be difficult to handle. As an audience, we're supposed to believe that this unknown prince falls in love with her at sight, decides to ignore, his responsibilities to his father and this slave girl. He's going to win. He's going to ring the gong. And after he sees Liu tortured until she kills herself, and then he's going to say, basically, Turandot, you bad girl, you just need a good man and everything will be okay. And dramaturgically, that's difficult for us to handle because it doesn't make Koloff look very good. And it's hard to, I mean, my problem with this opera has always been it's very hard to humanize Turandot to the point where you believe that this is going to happen. So, you know, already Puccini has set up for himself by adding the character of Liu, who doesn't exist in the Gozzi play. Okay? She doesn't exist at all. He adds this incredibly sympathetic character that we fall in love with because she's sweet and young and beautiful and gorgeous, and she's in love with him and she's going to die for his smile. In favor, you know, and he's going to favor this cold woman who has, you know, murdered however many princes she has murdered. Now, so he sets up a problem, and this creates a difficulty for his librettists, who are having to come up with a scenario. So this opera took forever to write. You know, he keeps rejecting endings. He keeps sending things back and said, no, I need something magnificent and transformative for this end. He had written himself into a corner. And through our discussions, Barbara and I, you know, I mean, I'm looking at it as a dramaturg going, it is an unresolvable conflict, you know, that he has set up for himself. How are these poor people supposed to write this for him? And then, of course, he dies so that we don't even get Puccini's transformative music to help us out, you know, to help us slide down the opera pill that makes us accept this. But you had some really interesting theories about why it was so hard for him to finish this.
Yeah, I have a thought about that, a thought or two. First of all, I think, you know, Puccini was under a lot of pressure. Ricordi was getting, his publisher was getting a little, was getting critical and was concerned. He was, particularly after Butterfly, he said, you know, your characters are all the same. It's the same woman who falls in love deeply, who can fall in love deeply. She's beautiful, she's vulnerable, and the music has some similarity, and you don't seem to be developing themes, you don't seem to be evolving, you seem to be stuck. What's the problem here? You know, do something more, do something different. So I think he was under that pressure. And then I think sometimes you hear that, you know, oh, poor Puccini, he had such a hard time with his librettists, and they just procrastinated, and and they had such a hard time communicating. But I wonder if they didn't have difficulty because he was giving unclear direction to them, because he didn't know how to do it. He didn't know how to. He was trying for the first time ever to get the two women, the bad woman and the good woman, on the same stage. And what was he going to do with them? How was he going to figure this out? I don't think he'd figured it out in his mind. So he couldn't help them with how to get to this incredible and transforming place. And I have a couple of quotes things that he had said to his librettists, Simone and Adami, about what his direction was like to them. One says, please place emphasis. I want you to place emphasis of Turandot on the amorous passion of Turandot, who had suffocated for a long time under the ashes of her great pride. So that's one way that's what he conceived of it. This is how he wanted this to come across. And another